Hello, class, and welcome to Critical Film Writing Lectures, Part 2. In this video, we're going to discuss structuring your essay. And as you can see from your first slide here, and as we talked about in the last lecture, an outline is always very helpful. It gives you a roadmap so you know where you're going. It may seem like you don't want to waste time on it, but in the long run, it will save you quite a bit of time. Okay, so typical essay structure, we're all familiar with this from high school, maybe even earlier. Intro, body, and conclusion, right? Just like a narrative screenplay. Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3, with Act 2 being the longest, body being the longest. Intro is short, it's one paragraph. It always concludes with your thesis statement. That's where your reader's going to look for it to know what you're going to argue in the paper. Body, we talked about TREE, the acronym, right? Thesis, then reasons, backed up by evidence and examples. Each one of those bodies is going to be a paragraph or two. And then conclusion, right? Restatement of your thesis and discussion of its broader implications. Should be very short. Just kind of summing everything up for your reader. Paragraphs. Your paper must be organized into paragraphs. These are the building blocks of any piece of writing. Again, this may seem obvious, but many writers do not use paragraphs well. They end up just cramming a whole bunch of text into one or two very long paragraphs, and it just ends up being a morass for your reader to wade through. And I realize that this part of this is because of the internet and blogs and comments and chat rooms and we've sort of learned these different styles of writing, and there's nothing wrong with them. They have their place. But when you really want to be clear and make an argument that someone can follow, you need to make sure that your paragraphs are relatively brief and that they don't tackle more than one subtopic at a time. So your intro, 1 to 2 paragraphs, depending on the length of the paper. If it's 5 pages paper or less, 1 paragraph is sufficient. Let your reader know right away what your paper is going to be about, what you're going to argue, so they don't have to go looking for it. Then the body, right, depending on how long the paper is. You may feel like you need to organize your paper into several different sections. That's fine. You can have subheadings. But again, your paragraph should be relatively short, between 3 and 7 or 8 sentences. Don't double space between paragraphs. That's just the way that students try to make their papers seem longer than they are. And of course, as I said, don't write your entire paper as 1 paragraph. Organization is always key, both for yourself and for your reader. So, as we said, a critical paper must include a short introduction that concludes with your thesis statement. I don't think I need that. So, there are a couple of keys to a strong introduction. We talked about making sure that your thesis concludes the paragraph. Don't put it in the first line, don't put it in the middle, put it at the end, because again, that's where your reader is looking for it, and it serves as a jumping off point, a transition into the body. The other thing is you don't want your intro to be long, 3 to 5 sentences if you're writing a 5-page paper. And the third thing is that you want your introduction to be specific. If you are writing about the representation of race in Goodfellas, for example, don't start with a broad introduction that discusses the career of its director or its Oscar wins or the history of mafia in the United States or anything like that, right? I know that in high school we learn that your intros should be broad and then narrow into specifics, but we end up starting too broad. You don't really need to do that. Your writing should get more specific as it becomes more sophisticated, um, and it should become more economical. And that means getting to the point quickly. And again, we're talking about making writing applicable to more than just college, right? All of these skills are skills you're going to need in the workforce. So instead of something broad leading to your thesis with related content, you could discuss the film's reception by Italian Americans or a few sentences about the historically common cinematic practice of stereotyping Italians as gangsters. So see how that's more specific than just writing about the mafia in general, right? If your paper is going to be about the representation of race in Goodfellas, then contextualize it by talking about how Italian Americans have been represented in other films. That's a short hop into your thesis, right? And it leads your reader nicely into the subject. The other reason why it's important to make your intro brief is because if not, you might end up stuffing a bunch of information in there that belongs in your body. That's very common, especially for young writers and inexperienced writers. They think that they need to start putting evidence and analysis into their intro, and you don't. Save everything for the body. The body's going to be the longest section of the paper. It's going to take up 95% of it. So you'll have plenty of space to put in everything you want in that long middle section, right? And the main thing is that you're going to offer reasons to believe your thesis. This paper argues that the representation of Italian Americans in Goodfellas is racist, based on prevailing stereotypes about Italian Americans in our culture, right? So then what do you do in the body? In this scene, or you might say something, you might write something like, a common stereotype of Italian Americans is that they like pasta. In this scene, pasta is eaten ... whatever it is, right? I'm not saying Goodfellas is racist. I'm just giving you an example. The reasons are backed up by evidence and examples from movies and extra textual sources such as other films, scholarly readings, books, and interviews. So if you really want to prove that Italian American stereotypes exist in cinema and that Goodfellas follows in its footsteps, then you need to find evidence from other scholars who have proven, or at least made a very convincing argument that those stereotypes exist, right? And you use that to support your analysis as well. Again, it's all about trying to convince your reader. Ask yourself, what does your reader need to know to believe what I'm saying? Rather than just taking it on my word, right? Film language. Be sure to use the technical film language, the terms that we've learned throughout the course when analyzing shots, scenes, and sequences. And define those terms if you need to. We're always writing for a reader who may have no knowledge of our subject. It's our job as authors, as writers, to inform. Now, that doesn't mean you want to bog your entire paper down with definitions, but it does mean that if you use a term that might not be familiar, such as mise-en-scène or a tracking shot, that you briefly define it, right? Before you give examples to your reader. Some examples of the film language. Again, you're familiar with this from this course. We didn't need to go through all of it, but the point is that whenever you write, you want to be as specific as possible. And you want to make sure that you are as informed as possible because you're trying to inform others. So using the proper terminology, the accepted terminology for whatever you're writing about is key. So when it comes to writing about film and making an interpretive analysis, plot summary can be tricky because I just said you're writing for a reader who may have no knowledge of your subject, and so you need to provide some plot summary high up in your paper, like maybe after the first or second paragraph, so that your reader has a basic idea of what the film is about if they haven't seen it. However, you don't want to include more than a few lines of plot summary because most of your paper should be analysis. So while it is necessary to set the context of the scene or scenes we'll be analyzing, you might write something like, in the scene in Lethal Weapon 2, when Murtaugh cradles Riggs in his arms, ... You need no more than a few sentences to do this. So it's really finding a balance of giving your reader an idea of the film's plot, so that they know what you're talking about when you go to analyze it, but not spending more than a few lines or a few percentage of the paper's overall length. And we talked about this. Whenever you critically engage specific topics and terms, you must provide definition and context for those topics and terms. Another thing we want to do when we write critical analysis is we want to avoid pure opinion. Well, wait a minute. Didn't you say that an argument is our opinion at the end of the day, right? We're arguing something that we believe. Well, yes. But what you want to avoid is opinionated language. So you wouldn't write something like The Defiant Ones is a fantastic film, one of the best about racism that there is, right? Because fantastic is your opinion. Best is your opinion. You can't prove that with evidence. So you just avoid that altogether. You're not telling your reader, you're not giving your reader an idea of the quality of the film. You're making an argument about the form and the function of the film, right? So leave out that opinionated stuff. Save that for the movie review. Keeping the thrust of your argument. I think, if you've ever written anything, that's hard, right? It's hard to stay on track. It's hard to know what to say at every moment in every paragraph. That's why an outline helps. But in order to have an effective paper, a persuasive argument that a reader can follow and become involved in, you must reiterate your thesis all the way through, right? Every paragraph and section of your paper needs to be involved in making that argument, restating that argument, keeping your reader focused on that argument. Essays that fail to do this almost invariably stray off topic and they become vague and confusing. So one of the best ways to stay organized is to use topic sentences, so that every paragraph begins with a sentence that tells your reader what that paragraph is going to be about and how it connects to the larger argument. So if you're writing about the representation of Italian Americans in Goodfellas, you might write something like, another prevalent stereotype in movies about Italian Americans is ... Goodfellas features that in this way, right? So your reader sees that, okay, this paragraph is going to be about this stereotype, and I see how it's connected to the overall argument. And then at the end of the paragraph, you write something like, and that's the way that stereotype is used in Goodfellas. So I know it sounds pedantic. I know it sounds repetitive, right? That you need to tell your reader both at the beginning and the end of every paragraph what you wrote about and or what you're going to write about. But believe me, it's the best way to stay organized, both for yourself and for your reader. Your paper should demonstrate depth about its subject and not breadth. What does that mean? Well, depth means that you're going into detail, you're doing a deep dive, a deep analytical reading of the text, right? And in order to do that, it means you probably have to not try to take on too much. So if you're writing a 5-page paper, which isn't very long, by the time you've got a intro and a conclusion and a plot summary paragraph, you don't have a ton of analysis. You don't have enough word count left to write about 15 scenes because you're not going to give your reader the detail that they need, right? You're barely going to be able to mention anything. You're better off writing about 3 scenes and really breaking them down, really showing your reader how the evidence from those scenes supports your argument. So finally, we get to the conclusion. Conclusions of argumentative essays should restate your thesis skillfully, not repetitively. You don't want to write the exact same thing you wrote. And remind your reader of its value. Why did you write this? What did you show them? How did you reveal meaning? Why is that meaning important? Right? And their ending is an opportunity for you to try for some eloquence, a telling quotation, historical context. Make your conclusion memorable. Let your reader go away with something, of the experience that they take with them, right? That doesn't just evaporate immediately. That's why we write. Revision, not popular among students, right? Especially because they write everything, 5 minutes before it's due. And hey, look, I've been a student. I understand. I've been there. But especially if you really want to be a writer, if you want to write professionally, if you want to write for a job, you want to go to grad school, you've got to revise. The revision process is fundamental. No first draft is as good as it could be, right? And revising is looking at more than just grammar, punctuation, and formatting errors and that sort of thing. It's about streamlining your arguments, enhancing ideas, right? Cutting and pasting, figuring out more efficient ways to say things, making sure you've got all those topic sentences in there so things stay clear and organized. That's what revision is. And of course, the details matter too, right? You need to proofread for correct grammar, spelling, punctuation, and formatting. All that stuff's really important, especially if you want to be a professional. If you submit work to professional editors and publishers that's not well copy edited, they're not even going to read the content. They're just going to trash it. So this is just basic stuff. And that includes double checking all the info related to your films, the names of actors and filmmakers, production information, box office, year of release, etc. Anytime you name a film, it should be in italics. The first time that you name it should have the year of release followed in parentheses, then a comma, director. And finally, get help. We all need it, right? No writer gets good without it, without someone reading their work and tutoring them along and giving them feedback. So have somebody help you, a friend, a family member, a writing tutor at the college, teaching assistant or instructor. Have them read over your essay before you turn it in, before you submit it for a class or before you try to send it for publication somewhere. And then, of course, at the very basic level, make sure you've included all the required info. And that means a title, your name, the due date, and all that good stuff. Okay, that is the end of our lecture on critical writing. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me.